Happy start to your week on Monday. Um, so, I want to cover this story pretty quickly. It's a tough one because Yo Mama covered it on the test stream, I think on Sunday. It might have been Saturday, but I think it was Sunday. I was a little busy with the Amberlynn Reed story, right? He said that it resurfaced for some reason. This is an old podcast that Billy the Fridge used to be a part of, and it was 2017. So, the significance of 2017 is that it was the first year that Trump started his first term. And he had campaigned on some really bigoted, racist concepts and conspiracy theories, right? Day one of his inauguration, he signed a lot of executive orders, one including the um, rejecting m- mostly Muslim countries from um, people seeking refugee status from coming into the US. So they were being detained at the airports. This was like in the very first week of his presidency. Um, what probably a lot of people who weren't paying attention to that story don't realize is that a lot of the refugees who were affected were coming from Haiti. So this year in 2017 was a year where there was neo Nazis were emboldened, the alt right. That's how they rebranded themselves to demonstrate, to exercise their freedom of speech, to speak at college campuses, to one of the big ones that got a lot of press was the march on Charlottesville, where they were holding tiki torches that they got from like Home Depot or something. And one of their crazed followers drove his car into a crowd of, I forget what the name of that group is, but they're basically there to keep the peace. They go to these protests to make sure that people don't get beat up. And Heather Heyer was one of the people that got hit by that car and killed. So this was kind of the beginning of these groups of people being allowed to mow down protesters with their vehicles and uh, being given easy access to getting out of actually physically harming people and killing people. Um, so it was a very contentious year. There was a lot of um, disenfranchised groups that were being targeted, including African Americans and pretty much anybody of color. So Billy has a podcast that he's on, and somebody, I guess, texted in a comment that said F Trayvon Martin. And they, one of the panelists read it out loud and realized his mistake, but it was a little too late at that point, and they started making fun of him for being stupid enough to read that. Your mama covered this on Test, so you can go and look at it there. But sure, it's an old story. It's from 8 years ago. But if when you put it into context, and you consider that Billy also made a joke about getting a noose for his co host when there was an active risk of people of color being lynched in America at that time. So there has been a lot of sweeping throughout the LCU to blow this off. Xylie was on Cafe this morning saying that it was a nothing burger, which is very surprising to me given that she has openly stated that she lives in Virginia, Charlottesville, Virginia. This would have affected them. This would have affected them a lot. Just like the active shooter in Roanoke would have affected her if she's been living there the whole time. I don't know if she's been living there the whole time. Just like the Confederate statues coming down would have affected her. But she's like, it's nothing burger. Are you sure we watched the same footage and we took the historical context of when he said that into consideration? What is going on with this network? So, Billy came on Test today to bully Yo Mama for covering the story and saying that he had called him a racist, and he didn't. He just pointed out his own words, which is what any good reactor will do, is they will let you sink your own ship. They'll give you enough rope, shall we say, to do what you need to do to your own reputation. And they'll have some commentary on it. Some reactors will have stronger words than other reactors. Um, Yo Mama probably should have done more research on the story because he didn't realize that George Zimmerman was claiming that he was part of a neighborhood watch. And he was acquitted based on the stand your ground laws in Florida. I don't even think this happened on his own property, so I don't know how he would have been standing his own ground when he stalked a teenager who was 17 and just walking back home. It wasn't his home. I think he was staying with like an aunt and an uncle or something like that. But so maybe that's why George was like, who's this black kid walking through my neighborhood? Like he wasn't a regular part of the neighborhood. But it doesn't matter. You don't just fucking kill people because you don't recognize them. Zimmerman got away with it. And it was this would have been, let's see, Trayvon was killed in 2012. Zimmerman was acquitted in 2013 and went on to have additional legal problems. I would suggest anybody interested in trying to defend Billy on this point should actually look up the history of what was going on at the time and ask yourself, is it appropriate to make fun of black names? Because that happened. Make fun of Trayvon Martin specifically, and also make a joke about getting a noose. So that's up to you guys, to decide. I I would have found it absolutely abhorrent had I seen that happen. Disgusting. Because, a lot of us were already like freaking out that we had such a racist, bigoted, homophobic divider occupying the White House. And we do again. Because everybody always thinks that if you elect a Republican, your taxes are going to go down. Have they? What's your cost of living right now? What's your cost of living look like right now? Is food any cheaper for you to buy? You know? Is it easier for you to get consumer products? I is it easier to get a job right now? So that's a fallacy. And the idea that he's Christian, he's a good Christian and he appealed to the evangelists. Dude doesn't attend church. He doesn't believe in shit. So why would you allow yourself to be tricked into that as well? But anyway, to make light of it in that way rather than say, okay, let's move on from this subject because obviously we don't feel that way about Trayvon Martin and we don't endorse that sort of viewpoint. And how about banning the people who were leaving comments like that on your podcast? You know, did you apologize? Is there anything showing that you actually apologized and took accountability for what happened? Why did it resurface on Friday? Why is it coming back up again? I don't know. But apparently he's getting talked about, and your mama covered it, and your mama isn't the greatest researcher. Um, he's a bit of a bad faith reactor, if you will, in my humble opinion. But I agree with what he's saying there about whether or not it was appropriate to say things like that, especially in 2017 when there was so much tension in America. Pretty amazing. Amazing. But anyway, it wasn't just a nothing burger, Xylie, and you should know that better than anybody given that you live in Virginia. But anybody who lived in Florida at the time, anybody who lived in Virginia, you would have been, and Texas, you would have been highly affected by these demonstrations, by what was going on. It's not a nothing burger. So I encourage you all to do some research on it, even if you're just looking at Wikipedia on what happened with Trayvon Martin. I'm sure there's tons of news footage still out there. Anyhow, I just wanted that quick update. I was going to do clips, but it was pretty clear to me that bull, uh, bully the fridge. Billy apparently has made amends with Nightmare after 2 months of crapping all over him. And I mean, I'm glad for them as peers within a working environment that they've settled that. But he's also taking advantage of Nightmare being from Wales and not understanding the dark history of racism in America. They abolished slavery in the UK a lot sooner than we did. So there's that. Anyway, um, that's my 2 cents on the story. I thought it was pretty disgusting, Billy. And I do find that oftentimes the words that you select come across as bullying or threats. That you're asking people to do things that are inappropriate on the network and then saying, well, obviously you should have known it was a joke. So, Sweet Tea, who's a lot younger than you, and this is her first podcast experience, she should have known all of the lore of King Cobra, the drinking, the addiction, the ex girlfriend who was stalking him and crazy. Like, you wanted to walk her into that situation, or telling Pupstar that she needed to eat the head of her rat that was in formaldehyde. You think that that's funny? That's the height of hilarity for you? I think you need to work on your sense of humor, buddy.